I'll give word to Vincent. Welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I have to do that in English. Is that okay for everybody? If I speak too quick or if somebody doesn't understand anything, please interrupt me, okay? Because I'm not here for myself, you know. Okay, so not so easy for me. It's never so easy for me to talk to so many people. I'm actually not like, it's not the most comfortable thing, but I get over it. I heard you people in Tallinn are also a little bit shy and a little bit, you know. So imagine you here. Listen, what I want to do is, I want to, you know, I think it's interesting. So you're looking at the pictures are there. I could tell you some anecdotes if you have any questions. But I think it's interesting maybe that we put Peter, the pictures. I think you also understand more about art or an artist if you put him, the time, and his motivation into a context. Does that make sense? So I think the key to understand somebody's work or somebody, there's sort of like three factors. One is obviously his work. One is his personality. And then there's also the place where he grew up. So I think, and you know what's interesting? If you have two, you know a lot about the third. Meaning, if you know where a person grew up and you know about his art, you can probably tell a lot about his personality, you know. And somebody talking? I know that's his television, right? Okay. So, like I said, I think it's we try to put this a little bit in the context. I want to tell you something before, because obviously Peter is German. Just as a general idea about art and what I think, you know, Peter is coming also from an art school background. And obviously we're in a photography museum. Almost the same time when photography started off, which was early 19th century. I think the first photograph was taken around 1820. Somebody knows this better than me, kind of, you know. Nicephore Niepce. Do you remember that? Anyway, he took a picture, took 8 hours of his background. So there was, it was something that is his, art historically, we call it the Romantic period. Friedrich Schiller, some of you might heard of, a German writer, said something really interesting. He said, what is the most frightening about our human condition is that we have a choice. And with having a choice, we have the fear of making the wrong choice. And that is something that is kind of following us all around. And it's true, you know, like if you look at me, for example, I made the choice to be a photographer. I've never done anything else, you know, and obviously there's always days where I wake up and I think maybe I should have done something else. But he says what art can do, and I think that's where it connects with Peter Lindbergh. He says art could take you into another place and you can try out different lives. You know, you can be with Peter on the beach. You know, you can be with Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca. You can walk with Van Gogh through the fields of the south of France, you know. And then you can come back home. And it's safe. But there's something interesting happen that for you, you can experience and imagine yourself in a very emotional way, because we're feeling it in the life of another person. And by connecting with that other person, you know, he can also go beyond himself. Does that make sense? So if we, you know, just to put this in context, if we would not have that, our reality would be just right here, right now. Our life would be very small, if you understand what I mean. By the opportunity to travel in art, our life, our emotional experience can actually be everything that we are, because we can extend. Okay, that's a little abstract, but I think if you look at Peter Lindbergh's work, it's a lot about, for himself, imagining himself, traveling into a different world, you know. So, any questions you ask me, okay? If I don't make sense, you're probably right, and I explain it again, you know. I think what's also something that might be interesting to see when you look at the pictures Peter is born 1944 in the industrial heart of Germany. Not a very nice place, called Duisburg. Anybody who can say this gets €1 from me. So now think about it. This is the height of the Second World War. His mother has a child. There is bombing all the time. I think there's a question to be had, consciousness. How much consciousness do we have as a 1-year-old? And to a certain point, we probably have more than we have right now, because we all know that the awareness of a child, of having everything for the first time, is very heightened. So I think I get sidetracked. But I do think, there is observations that even before, still being in the belly of the mom, we already have a sense of consciousness. Anyway, just to put this into a context, the first year of Peter's life, he's going in and out of bomb shelters. He has a frightening parents, he has a frightened mother. Coming out, is the house still there? Streets are burning. Dead people on the street. I don't want to make this dramatic, but it's the truth. So he comes from the most devastated, and everything is destroyed. War is over. He starts to grow up. He's 2-3 years old. There's not much there. And I do think it's important to put this into the context. Then this generation of Germans, and I'm one of them, well, he's older than me, obviously. He's a bit the generation from my parents. They grow up with an awareness of finding out what happened. And this generation is very suspicious, because they're looking at their parents and they say, at some point, were you part of this? How much did you know? How much did you do? This whole generation is very much, this is what we call the 69 generation. You had something like this in Estonia? In Berkeley, in America, it was the hippies, it was Woodstock. That's Peter's generation. But it's the one that asked questions, and it's really the one that looked at their parents. And I think this has a lot to do with his work, that they said, how much did you know? How much were you a part of what happened at that time? So that generation is very much tainted by that. Now I want to take you a little, I think there's another thing, and that suspicion on that, I think there's a word called antagonism. That antagonism he has with the system, the established, the official system, the way things are, and the way he's provoking it, is very much, in my eyes, a way of how Peter deals with fashion. He is in the system, he is a very successful fashion photographer, but he's constantly rejecting it. You see very little fashion on his pictures, and I tell you about this later, ask me about this. I want to tell you something else to understand Peter's pictures better. Let me know if I go too far back, okay? But historically, in art, in politics, you have two tendencies who are, let's say, there's a rivalry, idealism and realism. So let's say early 19th century, painting had an incredible quality, incredible, photorealistic. But the subject of painting was mostly Greek mythology and religion. It got almost a bit tacky. If you go to museums, you look at work, like 1805, 1810, it's very academic, Then something happened. There is a painter, mostly in France. I do talk about Peter Lindbergh. There's a painter, Millet. Millet goes out on the field, starts painting farmers. And not farmers or farm women in a beautiful, idolized kind of way. Farm women in their condition, in what they're going through, with the social interest of the person. Now, I think when you look at these pictures, maybe there's a little bit of a light going on, You have a similar tendency. So the way we talk about this in art, or the way you could say it, let me give you another example so I understand this better. 1940-30, Hollywood. If you watch Hollywood movies from the 30s, Casablanca, men wear tuxedos, look impeccable. Women wear beautiful dresses, you know. Very interesting story, but mostly very rich people, you know, very idealistic lifestyle. Now then in Italy, there's something that called, you know, the Italians, right after the war, when Peter is born, take reportage material, most of the times the Americans left behind, and reportage war cameras, and start making movies with what they have. And they develop something called Italian neorealism. It's often not with actors, it's with real people. There is an Italian director, Roberto Rossellini, that made a movie, Rome, Open City. And it's just about when the Americans left and there was like a lawless, Italy went through a lot because it was very poor, it was liberated first. And just, you know, without making it too dramatic, in Naples, over 80% of the women were prostitutes to survive because there was nothing there. People ate horses and wood. Anyway, so there was a very different reaction to reality. Now what we said, and now I'm still talking about Peter Lindbergh, we say that in art there's different periods of where you can reduce and extend the aesthetic distance. Now if you extend the aesthetic distance to the subject, you do something that what we do in advertising. You idolize, you put, let's say, the subject on a pedestal. And what I really like about Photographiska, actually, right now, you have another exhibition right here from the Russian woman, I have a hard time pronouncing her name. Exactly. Elisaveta is very interesting, very creative. She's extending the aesthetic distance. The pictures are very unreal. There's a lot of post-production. There's a lot of, like, you know, she's working with visual elements. Peter does exactly the opposite. He wants nothing. He wants you to be as close to the person as possible. Now, to put this in would be maybe say, look, a James Bond movie extends the aesthetic distance. It's unrealistic, it's very entertaining, a lot of action, but these are not real people. But you watch it and you're like, yeah, you know, that's pretty good, you know. And then you see a love story, and they're just sitting there and they're talking, and you're a bit like, yeah, okay, you know. But I tell you, if you stick to it, after half an hour, you're in it, and you know, I've been through that too. And it goes right here. And James Bond doesn't. But James Bond entertains you. So there's always two types of artists. There's the one with the happy ending. There's the one that gives you what you want. And we do want it, and there's nothing wrong with it. There is no judgment. That it's good to have a happy end. And I think from a social point of view, we need happy ends in life, you know, because otherwise we wake up and it's all this misery. But then there's the other people. Then there's the people that have the capacity to say, but what if it's all different, you know? And they stimulate your curiosity. And I think those people are interesting too. So you can see when you look at artists, you know, you will very much see an artist's tendencies. Today it goes so quick. But when you look through bigger artist tendencies, there's always an extension and a reduction of how do you deal with the subject, of the human condition. And sometimes it's necessary to idolize it to make the point, you know, Steven Spielberg, you know. And sometimes it's necessary to bring it really close and says, no, this is you. This is right, this is you right here, you know. So does that make any sense? Yeah? Okay, if it's boring, just ask a question, then I start talking about something else. Where was I? Okay, let's go on this for a second. So, as I said, 1940s, by the way, a movie Peter loved and I love is an Italian neorealist movie called The Bicycle Thief. The Bicycle Thief is Vittorio De Sica, no real actors, incredible film. It's about a guy, a family father, who gets a job because he has a bicycle. That bicycle gets stolen. And everything falls apart. Everything. He loses his job. He loses his dignity. He loses his livelihood. And in the end, he loses his morality because he doesn't know how to go on. and he steals a bicycle himself. So you see, I think, well, that's my interpretation. The point is that a material subject, a product, is more important than the dignity of the person, because it's the product that decides who you are. It's not anymore, this is a good man that's falling apart. And it's an incredible film. Americans, just imagine, Hitchcock would make a movie about a stolen bicycle, you know? It's just a complete different approach. It's not entertaining. But like I said, the distance of what you go through, you know, that was something, sorry, I'm talking too much. I know this is not a tour about Italian neorealism. Then the French have something called Nouvelle Vague. You know, I'm trying to have a French accent. Did you notice that? So, okay, I'm still talking about Peter, because then we go into the 70s, and things get, you know, my generation knows that. You know, it gets a bit to the disco, you know, clothing becomes more important, fashion becomes more important, you know. Studio 54 in New York City. The first modeling agency opens in New York City called Zoli, which is a very impressive thing. There's comments from, you know, Sophia Loren, for example, about being very impressed walking into a room with like 40 beautiful 20-year-old women, which today, obviously, you have it at any influencer event. But it was something new, you know. Then in the early 80s, MTV. Anybody remembers MTV? MTV does something interesting, because I think it's a little bit what happens today with Instagram. Suddenly, it's not about the music. It's not about the substance. It's about how you look when you're singing it. And if you don't look good singing, you're out, you know? Those bands like the Pogues or maybe the Kings, you know, they were drinking that bad skin. They didn't look good on camera. And they got switched out very easy by Madonna, by George Michael, by Michael Jackson, people they knew how to sing it, show people. So MTV kind of brought, you remember Dallas and Dynasty, anybody that time? The mid-80s, shoulder pads, you know, a lot of hairspray. It was a funny time. And within the center of this, Richard Avedon brings out a book called In the American West. And In the American West is, it's a landmark in photography museum, because it really brings the aesthetic distance to a point of no return, you know? Sorry if I go too far off subject sometimes, you know, but 1913, Malevich paints a black square on a white canvas. Where else can painting go afterwards, you know? There is no more expectation to the painter. There is no more questions to be asked. He said that is the end, a black square on a white canvas, you know? I don't know if it's exactly the same, but what Avedon did the aesthetics or the concept of no. There's no composition, there's no light, there's no location, there is just the person. That is it. You're looking at yourself. And I think Peter looked at that. And then in the mid-80s, Peter's already a well-working fashion photographer. He already shoots for Italian Vogue. Every single picture you see here, well, at least let's say 19 out of 20 I shot for Italian Vogue. Ask me about that later. So that book really made an impact, because it was so, it was such an honest final statement that even until today, it's very hard for people to go beyond that. It's probably the most, like Calvin Klein advertising. See all these advertisings with, every time you see a person standing on white, it's taken from Richard Avedon's book. Now, Peter puts a lot of women on black, but it's the reduction to it's just them. And there's one thing that Peter says. Now, there is a, should we go to another room, or should I keep talking? What? Let's have a democratic decision. Okay, we go to another room. Let's go somewhere else. Okay, where were we? Where were we? The black background. So I think in the mid-'80s, and obviously I didn't know Peter then, I'm sure this will, and Peter and Avedon have a particular relation, which was not that easy. I don't know if they would agree to that, but so what happens? I think Peter is shooting, and you know what's interesting? Neither in this exhibition, all of these pictures you see here, they start in 88, 89. Well, Peter was already a fashion photographer for 15 years, you know, at least 10, and being very successful. There's pictures, they're hard to find, but there's pictures from 1981 with Peter shooting for Italian Vogue. Now, Italian Vogue wasn't the Vogue that he shot for. There's one, you know, Peter was a very, and you know, look, we were not baking cookies every Sunday. I mean, we knew each other, we were friendly, but you know, I was not invited for Christmas, so don't think I pretend like to be his best friend. That would be cheesy, you know. But I mean, you know, we were talking. And there was one story, very nice guy, by the way, really nice guy. And very confident. And there was one story that expresses a lot, that personality, that confidence, and also a little bit pushback. Because so this photographer was asked in 1988 by American Vogue to shoot a story for them. And he was like, not sure. So there was a legendary man running Italian Vogue. There was a woman that called Grace Mirabella, who later on opened her own magazine, and there was a guy called Alex Lieberman. I mean, these people were there for a long time. So Alex Lieberman calls in Peter Lindbergh in New York to come to his office, and he says, you know, I hear you don't want to work for us. And this is Peter telling the story, right? I'm trying to tell it with his words. And Peter says, no, I mean, it's not that. It's like, I know who you are, I have a lot of respect for you, but the woman you shoot, I don't know how to do that. I don't think I can give you what you want. I can't. I'm not, you know. And then Lieberman says, well, what is the woman you shoot? You know, like, and he's like, well, it's, you know, when we're talking about the late 80s, I don't know if you remember that, you know, there's a lot of, it. Like I said, it's the interesting thing is, and that's what I would like to somehow see the context, it's a lot about like it is today. A person lives a lot through what people live in Instagram, background and decoration. What do you wear, what do you hold, what do you got, and where do you stand, and who do you stand next to sometimes? But it's all accessorized, it's decorated, you know? And Peter says, it's not really my woman. So Alex says, I don't know why I'm calling Alex, you know, I mean, Mr. Lieberman, to Mr. Peters, you know. Mr. Lieberman says to Peter, okay, I tell you one thing. You take any model you want. You know, you take any stylist you want, you go wherever you want, and you shoot your woman, and you come back and you show me what this is all about. And Peter says, okay, great. Goes to LA, already picks the girls that he likes, his posse. The picture is there somewhere. Does a series, and the stylist brings some stuff. He's like, nah, let's put some white shirts on. The stylist's like, nah, it's not a lot of fashion. He's like, it's not about the fashion. It's just, they just want me to do a test. I'm like, okay. So he shoots this picture that's over there. I don't know if you've seen it. Anybody, if you walked around already. There's a picture with, there's another version of that where they're actually laughing. Can talk about this later. Peter goes back to Alex, Mr. Lieberman, and they looking at it and they're like, okay, I see you had an interesting weekend, but what are we going to do with this? Peter's like, I don't know. I'm sorry if it's not what you want, but you asked me to shoot my woman. That's my woman. And Mr. Lieberman says, yeah, that's very interesting. Don't call me, we call you. You know, he's out. Peter's like, okay, what? Okay, that didn't work out. 6 months later, Anna Wintour takes over the magazine. Grace Mirabella is out. Alexander Lieberman, who is really an incredible icon, I mean, in fashion. If you like fashion, he's one of those. But I mean, I think by then he's probably 227 years old. So he retires, and I don't even know who was the creative director who took over. But interestingly enough, he could not be replaced with somebody on his level. Anyway, fun fact. So Anna Wintour comes and goes through, for some reason, that drawer where the pictures are from Peter Lindbergh, calls him up and say, I would have given you 20 pages if you would have shot this for me. 6 months later, you know. Now, just imagine, for some reason, out of the way destiny works, you know, Grace Mirabella could have been there for another 6, 8 years. You know, Peter's career would have been gone very different. Because American Vogue gives you the power to be present in the market. That's your commercial riding horse. Now, at the same time, something else happens. 1989, I believe, Franca Sciuzzani, I don't want to like hit you with all these names, but these are the main fashion editors. Now, any artist is only as good as the people they work for him, right? So Franca Sciuzzani says, I like what you do. And Franca, that was the biggest lottery ticket Peter ever had. Franca understood that because Franca, after all these 80s shoulder pads, a lot of studio pictures, interestingly, you know, any photographers here? Back in the day, you know, people were shooting slide film, you know, and it was just, you know, it was kind of a different. I mean, obviously, Peter shot negative, analog. Slide film is negative too, but it's something that is it has to be very accurately exposed, you know. So you use it in the studio. Everything was very carefully prepared. And then Peter says, you know what? And that's the interesting thing, is because what Peter really does is not that different what Millet does 150 years earlier when he says, I want to go out on the field. I want to shoot the people on the field, you know? Because when you ask where this comes from, he says, the girls I've seen, they didn't live in a studio. I saw art girls in art school. And what they're wearing had a place, it had a motivation. It came from somewhere. It was not artificial. So there's another, you see what I'm saying? There's another connection there to the Italian neorealism. They wanted to be more authentic. They wanted to bring something from a real person. Now, fashion is not about real people, you know? Just like cinema, it's not really about real people. And that's the interesting part with Peter a lot, that there's this constant, like I said, I want to call it antagonism and fight. It's like a couple that really has different opinions about everything, you know? But that's the energy that gives the relationship. They can't let go of each other. I mean, this man was clearly a very successful fashion photographer, even though he had, in every interview, in every questions, he was asked about, why do you hate fashion? You know? And he said, you know, I don't hate fashion, I just don't care about it. It's not what I do, you know? And I, you know, I mean, if you see that, and honestly, I think this room is interesting for that. Because I think, look, these are later pictures, for example, and he goes a little bit, if you want to be rough, and let's be a little critical, there is more decoration and background, because the girls are more dressed, and the boat story is very imposing, you know. But I have to say, if we go around the corner, the signature work of Peter Lindbergh is the way he shoots the woman. And I think those are the pictures, they're really the most impressive one. It's not about, I mean, I think he does it, and I understand if somebody shoots all the time, and I think he was very much more, that's another thing we can talk about. Ask me questions, because I forget. I think that he wanted to have a cinematic idea. That's why later on he shoots actors more than models. But I think what he brings in is really the way he sees the person. And if you want me to stand here and explain that, that's the one thing about an artist, that's always the interesting thing. The essential thing, what an artist is all about, can't be explained. And what Peter had, everybody will tell you that. And his eyes brightening up when he talks about it. He doesn't like to talk about fashion, or he doesn't like to talk about so much about beauty. A lot of people ask him about beauty. There's always this beauty conversation. But it was always about the intimacy with the person. That's what it's about for him. And that's really essentially, that's why I told you the story in the beginning. He has an ability to connect and to reduce the distance. And and nobody knows how he did it. And it was a myth when he was around that he had a comfort. There was a comfort zone. And for him, he says, he gets very spiritual when he talks about it. He says, when you're with somebody, when you shoot somebody, there is this conversation where he says an immaterial space opens up. He says he literally says, and I'm quoting, he says, I've seen miracle happens if people feel the trust and are becoming unaware of the camera. Now what's interesting is that, am I talking too much? You have any question?
No, it's
Sorry. Peter started shooting children. Those were his first pictures. I think it was the children of his brother. And you see somehow that innocence, that unawareness of the camera, that unconsciousness was a significant way that he tried to translate into models. He did not want the pose. He is far away from, that's why I say, extending the aesthetic distance. A couple of days ago, I always use it as an example because Balmain just put out these new pictures from Giselle is working again. She's divorced, so, the woman needs money. Well, I don't know, it depends, but why am I saying that? I'm not ready for this, right? I have to be more professional. Anyway, so Giselle is working again. She just did the pictures for Balmain with a very well-working fashion photographer right now called Pavarotti. And they are so the point that I'm trying to make with you. Now you take that new Balmain campaign. It's Giselle, the hair is all blowing, but the picture is, every single hair curl in that picture is retouched. And it's well placed, and it's a beautiful shot, and they stretched her legs and they shot it from below, and she looks like $1 million, But Peter is, what defines him, he is a very calm guy, but he is passionate about his hate for retouching and post-production. Because he said it removes everything that we're all about from a person. He said it's not just about, being like an exchangeable item of slickness. He says everything that fashion removes is what makes you interesting. That is you. And he says, I will never understand. And that idea, that thought, that somebody says, it's hard right now, even for his women. Am I getting sidetracked? It's hard for a woman to get older in this business. And you also have to say Peter was incredibly privileged because what this guy, he found something. And I don't think they would have not found it without him, and he would have not found it without them. But this woman, look, but that's Elena, that's Sasha. But there's actually behind, look, there's Elena again. They had something. And me as a photographer, the last conversation, I had with Peter, the last time we were on a one-to-one, that was the subject because he said, I don't know who to shoot anymore, And you could see Hitchcock didn't know who to shoot anymore because Ingrid Bergman had a scandal. I don't know if you know that. She was with a divorced man. And Grace Kelly married the king. And and you can see that Hitchcock's movies slightly deteriorating in the late 50s because he lost that leading woman. Then he shot Tippi Hedren for The Birds. They had a huge conflict. They didn't get along. She didn't know how to handle him. He didn't know how to handle her. So if a director loses his leading woman, that type of woman, that's larger than life. Hitchcock wanted that, They're gone. And I think for what's interesting here, did any of you see that British Vogue cover that came out like 6-8 months ago with Peter's girls, with Christy and with Cindy, and that one is actually shot by the same photographer that just did the Balmain campaign, and it's just, and I don't know who to pay that I could sit with Peter in a cafe and talk about this. Sorry, am I doing something wrong here? You guys hear me? Testing. So these women these women that Peter used for their authenticity, that is his word. Authenticity, like you are your living experience, makes you the richest person that you are going through things. And that he always felt, who came up with the idea of erasing that? You know, because if you erase the years, the wrinkles of your face, you also erase everything that you have become. There's a nice line of David Bowie. He says, growing older means becoming the person that you always were supposed to be. Now, obviously, I love that because I just turned 55. You know, I'm like, yes, finally. You know, it's all there. But what's strange is, and you know, that's why I was talking about the Vogue cover. So they shoot, you know, Linda right now has this type of comeback. You know, I mean, I think everybody agrees. Definitely, Franca Sciuzzani, Peter was working on. We all think. I only shot Linda, I think, 3 times, but we all think she is. There was a talent there. She's the Marlon Brando of modeling, you know. There was just something that woman, there was no fear, you know. Mila too, by the way, you know. And I don't know, is this there? You know, look, when you see that, you can see it a little bit, how much he depends on that. Well, why do I always turn around? It's the same thing. But if you watch that, there's a part of Mila, and she's just talking to herself, you know. But there's no fear. She's not afraid not to look great. The biggest, you know, difference right now to these influencer girls today, you know, they all got one angle, you know, and they always do the same thing, and then they all do the same retouching because they said, this is how I look good. You know, and you were like, yeah, but that's not what it's all about. You're reducing yourself to one little axis of yourself. It's like you always say the same sentence, and you always, like, you know, sit in the same restaurant because you think that lighting makes you look good. You know, that's not who you are, you know. A relationship, any relationship from people in this room, a relationship starts when you start losing the fear of each other to be yourself. When you don't have to wear makeup anymore in the morning, when you know that it's going to be fine. He's not going to judge you. Yeah. I mean, you know, there's another scene, but, you know, there's just something more to look at that, you know. I mean, Peter, he doesn't give no direction, but she's just constantly feeding him something, you know. It would be very hard to find a woman like this today, you know. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. I'm like multitasking with the screen and myself. What I'm trying to say, the point I was trying to make since half an hour, I guess, is that what's difficult to see is that these women, they had it all. And now they're all in their late 50s. You know, I shot Cindy like a year ago. You know, she's 58, and she's an older woman right now, you know, but there's nothing, I would love to shoot her the way she is, you know. She was a lot in the sun, she took a hit, but she's a beautiful aging woman. There's nothing, Peter would have loved to shoot her like that, you know. But then you look at photographs, I know there's literally a photographer, David Jarrow, who just recreated Cindy's Pepsi commercial picture from 30 years ago, making a 60-year-old woman like she's 25, you know. Do you remember the movie The Irishman that just came out, Martin Scorsese? Or the Harrison Ford movie that just came out? I mean, look, there's people that obviously digitally, for the story, they make Harrison Ford look like he's 25 years younger, right? Okay, why not? It's Indiana Jones, it's part of the story. You know, in The Godfather, they make people look younger. They used Robert De Niro, you know? Who plays the younger Marlon Brando in The Godfather? Robert De Niro, which I think was probably a better choice, you know? But today they can do it electronically, but at least it serves the story. But why would you make, you know, a woman that's been through all this, that lived through all this, and if you talk to Cindy, they're coming so alive. I was sitting with Cindy in LA, and we were both pulling out all of these photographers from, oh, remember this guy, and you know, this guy always did this, and you know, this guy was taking pictures without underwear, you know. I was like, with you? No, with him. I was like, what? You know, so they have all these funny stories. The 90s were pretty crazy, you know, because there were very few girls and very few photographers, and they already knew each other, you know. Am I giving too much away? Anyway, it's hard to see. It's hard to see for me that they go against actually what they're all about, because they used to have that authentic presence. And suddenly, they've been digitally rejuvenized. Is that the proper way of putting it? Anyway, look, I talk to you so much about this because I know that if for some reason Peter would have done this tour, this would have been, this is his heart. His heart is like, why do people retouch? He didn't get it, and if you see, even back in the day, everything was a lot about that. Shall we go to another room? Sure. Okay. Okay, I want to tell you two things. That was, by the way, the picture I was talking about. That's a picture that's first in the drawer, well, not the garbage, but at least it was on the drawer of American Vogue. I think one thing also what I think you can see really here is that this is just the face. I think these are the key elements of Lindbergh's work. And what you see over there, actually, you see a strong resemblance in a certain way to the influence from the American West, where you really, you're reducing, Peter loved hands. There's a lot, in all his books, you can always see, almost on every shoot, he does a picture of hands, because there's something about the way you're interacting with life. Also, I think some things look at this picture, for example. One thing you will see, if you look at Peter's work, very little sunlight, Because, simple reasons. In the end, I think what is so striking, every really good artist, he finds a core to translate his work into the human condition and into his own biography. Now, Peter, again, grows up in Duisburg, and I tell you, in Duisburg, the sun doesn't shine, probably less than in Tallinn. It's gray. And he didn't like sunlight. Literally, his assistant says, when he says up in the morning, he's like, "Oh, Peter, it's going to rain all day." He's like, "That's amazing," And everybody else was like, "What?" He's like, "That's great. Let's go to the beach. It's raining." So not just that. What's actually funny, and I didn't know that myself. I just, that when Peter was an art student in Duisburg, it's down from Belgium. So in his younger years, he was actually going a lot to the beaches of Belgium with a couple of friends. And what you see on the beaches of Belgium is freezing women in the rain, freezing women in the wind. Now you look how much impact, did that had. And that, I think the one thing he loved is how the wind and the cold, it changes the expression of a person. It's priceless, you can't do that. Anybody of you seen On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando? Okay, if you haven't seen it, you have to see it.
Oh, we see it every day.
What?
We see it every day.
The waterfront?
It's the weather we have here. So we
Yeah,
photograph during the rain.
So when Elia Kazan, very famous director, Marlon Brando's signature movie is On the Waterfront, and they shot it in New York on the port, and it was freezing cold. And everybody was like, you sure you want to do this? Super difficult for production. And Elia Kazan is like, look at these rosy actor Hollywood faces. It's disgusting. When I put them in the cold, something happens to them. Like they freeze up, like they become more real. The cold does something to the face. And Elia Kazan said he loved that, And I think Peter loved that too. He says, give me some cold wind into a model, because again, it reduces the beauty, the distance, the perfection, This guy built huge sets. I mean, don't be mistaken. He was not alone with these girls. There were 8 assistants, their trucks, their cars. There's a huge team. And I think for him was about the interesting part is, sometimes when he shot the Pirelli calendar in LA, they built these huge scenes. Let's imagine this. At least the same amount of people. Everybody has some sort of job. And then he goes with the camera and he says, he just takes that one shot where somebody just sitting there waiting, He said he just wanted to, he said some lucky accident is going to happen. He never shot the whole thing. But he says, the whole thing is a diversion of attention where he can feel he can get there and have that stolen moment that I think that was mainly what it's all about. Does it make sense? There's actually, in Hollywood, there's directors. There's a guy called Sidney Pollack. he works with two cameras. Sidney Pollack made all the early Robert Redford movies. And he works with one camera, and Robert Redford is acting to the camera. But there's a second camera here. And he mainly used that camera because Robert was unaware of it, and he thinks he got the more authentic shots. And when I'm a photographer, I always feel it's true when you work with the model, she's very focused on you. And I'm always jealous about people walking around and they can just observe and take, you know? And I think that is the situation that Peter was trying to create. Does that make sense so far? Any questions? One? Come on, don't leave me alone up here, you know? I'm trying really hard. Okay. I'll tell you something a bit more about photography. If you have questions about Peter, you have to ask. There is something interesting that when you take any of you have been to New York lately? Over there. Okay, remember when you pass the security, they ask you a question, did you pack your own bags? Did anybody give you anything? Right? You know, I always think when they ask you that question, it's actually the opposite. In life, you don't pack your own bags. Somebody else packs it for you, and you just have to walk around with it. We all got that bag that we carry. And some bags are a bit heavier and some are a bit lighter, but we don't really know what's inside. And I think that really defines our biography. And that can also be a little bit what David Bowie means. The older you get, the more you realize what's in that bag that you carry around with you. But as an artist, or even as a viewer, there is a conscious and an unconscious moment when you're looking or taking pictures. Because you take that picture, you decide you want to do that picture, but there's an unconscious way that you don't really know why that. Why does Peter want the woman to look like that? You know? Now you can therapeutically say, because these are women with greasy hair, and this is the woman he saw in Duisburg when he was 15 and he gains a consciousness that there are women. This is the woman he sees going to the supermarket or to work in the morning. This is the female that he finds attractive. It's a very real, rainy, gray day woman, you know. However, what's the interesting thing is there's really a very unconscious part, and you're projecting it into your photography. And when you're looking at the pictures, you're looking at a part of yourself that you would not discover otherwise. That's always the interesting, it's a self-revealing process. Does that make sense? You're taking a picture and it comes from a place you would not know about. And it's a similar thing for you. It triggers a certain emotion when you're looking at a picture. It triggers a reaction. And you're not really sure where that comes from. Now, Peter says something really beautiful. My favorite thought that Peter had was that he says when you create something, it's kind of a process of birth. And he says if you're giving birth, everything comes from something. Nothing comes from nothing. So at that moment, everything that you try to express something, you feel something. And everything that you are, and that's the same thing that he says with the faces. That's why this is so important. He says what you are a reservoir of your own experiences. You're a sponge of, you are the sum of everything that you've been through. And the more you live, the more you experience, including in a gallery, you're experiencing, you're feeling, you're traveling in your mind. You become a richer person. And somehow, right now, in a very magical way, you're connecting with the very emotional heart of a person that died 5 years ago, and you're looking at his work and it lives on in you. It's a very beautiful process, you know? And you have the same with music, you know? So Peter says, the creative part, I don't know exactly his words, but I'm sort of interpreting. The creative process is kind of a renaissance. It's a rebirth of everything that you are, of everything that you've been through, comes back alive and reshapes itself in the act of creation, which I think is a very beautiful way of putting it. Does that make sense? So, obviously for me as a photographer, but I think for all of us, there's that connection that, you know the director David Lynch?
Yes.
Yeah. David Lynch, actually something very few people know about Peter. Peter was really into transcendental yoga. Every morning and every night, this guy was doing transcendental yoga. And you know what? Who else is doing it? David Lynch. So they have a very spiritual side that you may not know, And David Lynch says something very interesting. He says, inside of us, inside of each of us is an ocean of consciousness. He says, when you can say, we separate it through skin and shape and form, but inside of us, what we are, it's all the same. And we're trying to overcome that barrier, the barrier of the skin, the barrier of the mind, having different thoughts. But emotionally, we all kind of the same thing. Even Paul Cézanne, the painter, says that art brings together, art brings together which would have never been separated, which is kind of, if you want to say, it's a very spiritual thought of like having a paradisic reunification. We may have to go through life separate, but before and after we've all been the same, So Peter shares that kind of idea. Sean Penn, the actor, calls it connecting on commonalities. He's more American, he's a bit more practical, but he's true. He says in 1855 or in 2097, somehow we will all connect on commonalities on certain needs, desires, longings, fears. In the end, we change very little. And communication works right on that. He says if you connect with somebody on certain commonalities, you feel that there is something in us, that we feel less alone. There's a beautiful story from a photographer I talked to. You all probably know Richard Avedon. Avedon is born Upper American East Side, right across, very close to the Metropolitan Museum. And I love that story. And Avedon says when he was a little boy, he was a bit of a lonely child. And when he was a little boy, he went a lot to the museum. And that was like around the war, nobody went to a museum. So he was there alone. And he looked at those pictures, a little bit like you looking at Peter right now. And he said he didn't understand the paintings. But he says they understood something, they felt something that he feels too as a 10-year-old. And he said being around those paintings make him feel less alone in this world, I thought that, and that's true, that's what art can do, There's a sense of unification, there's very few other things that can do that. I give you one quick example because I know it's important to Peter, to me. Let's say, let's say, look, like I said, 300 years ago, a composer goes through a specific problem, works something off. It's going through something. It could be a separation, losing a parent, losing somebody he loves. Makes a song, puts all of this in the song. It works. That song lays there. 200 years later, a musician, maybe also searching, looking through compositions, finds that one, plays it, and it resonates with him. Because maybe also he is going through a particular moment in his life, He is interpreting the notes. He never met the other guy. The notes come alive in his instrument 200 years later. Happens every day. You are on a red light downtown Tallinn. 50 years later, on the radio they play that song. And suddenly something happens. We all know that we can listen to music, and when the song is, it could be 10 notes, could be the whole song. And when the song is over, you feel different. There's something there that makes you feel maybe less alone, but you said, I felt that too. You have a connection to a person, and this is not esoteric. You've all been through this. There's not one person in this room that hasn't felt that you suddenly said, me too, I've been there. And I think if you look at some of these paintings, well, photographs, that is really what art can do. It goes beyond that physical barrier that carries us through. Does that make sense? And I think when Peter says a good creation is a renaissance of everything we've been through, it's what we go through is very much common, but how we go through it, that's very much the difference. And if we're able to share that, I think then we feel something that nothing else can really give to us besides the artistic experience. Does it make sense? Shall I tell you some more anecdotes? Sorry, I got a little bit like that, I think it's important to, thank you. I think it's important to see that Peter was a very poetic guy. He was not an intellectual person, but there is a very deep poetry in him, and that was very important to him. And I think what I'm trying to do is make you look at his work, maybe not through his eyes, but understand the broader context of his intentions a little bit, These are not, the picture, let me say this before I stop. Look, you walk around and you're looking at photographs, right? But I think what's so important is always to remember, photographs also looking at you. Photographs looking at you in a very honest way, like in a way that it's almost frightening sometimes, because photographs know something about you you may not want them to know. What I mean is that a photograph triggers an intuitive reaction, an emotion you may not like. It might make you feel something, but you may not be ready for that feeling. You may like it. Like I said, there's a lot of photographs today, they sugarcoat it, they make you feel comfortable, but not all of them do. But that's the range of what you have. But photographs looking at you, they trigger, would be the Gen Z way of putting it maybe. Photographs provoke a certain reaction in you, and they take you to a point in yourself emotionally you would not be able to be without it. Photographs have a very, look, I can give you examples, I don't want to exhaust you, but you can decide on 2-3 things on a photograph. But afterwards, every single picture that you really try to connect with, like you're connecting with a person, can do the same thing. If you meet somebody, they'll take you into your very own personal, emotional landscape. And you go in that landscape, and it's yours, and you will stand very alone on that field, and probably it's going to be the field of your childhood or your past. And you'll be confronted with things that may not be easy for you to relive, but suddenly you're back there, And I think it's an interesting confrontation that happens, and only music, art, photography can take you to those places, sometimes another person, But there's a very beautiful process of how individual and how uncontrolled, and that's why I said there's an unconscious reaction of comfort, of uncomfort, of something that I call attractive, repulsive, also sometimes indifferent, But even if you're indifferent, you ask yourself, why doesn't that not touch me? It touches others, Something blocks you there. Something is protecting you, But you find out aloud. It's a very self-revealing process. As much as it is for Peter to look at the way, why does he shoot Carrie Otis like that? That's his Carrie Otis. There's 1,000 pictures of Carrie Otis taken, but this is Peter's Carrie, And I think Oscar Wilde also said, every photograph, every painting, Oscar talks about the painting, every painting, if it's taken with emotional intention, says more about the painter than about the painted. And it's the same thing for you as the viewer. If you look at these pictures, what it says to you, you know. It's an uncovering of a mirror, you know. You're cleaning out a foggy mirror and you see a part of yourself in there, you know, if you have the courage, you know, to really look at it. I challenge every one of you to look 15 minutes at yourself into a mirror. And I guarantee you, after 15 minutes, the person you've seen in the beginning is not the same person you see at the end. You know, it will change. Very interesting process if you have the courage to do that. Just look at yourself. And if you look at paintings, if you listen to certain things, you know, it happens the same way, you know. You reach another level. And I think you want to do that with the most simplistic and direct way of doing it. And the simplicity of Peter, that's so much just about the person. What does that mean? It's about the human condition. And I think if you reach that as an artist, you know, then 5 years after you're dead, you know, which is very sad, you know, you still have, what, how many are we? Hundreds of people walk through these galleries and still look at his work, you know, because he understood something about the human condition, but it only works because he's passing it on, you reacting to it, you know. Quite beautiful, no? Any questions? One single question. Give me one. Come on, I have to leave. I have to go back home. Give me one question. Nothing? Okay, sorry, I don't want to be like, you know. But I don't know what else to tell you. You want me to tell you something else? That was sort of like, I don't want to like overload and give you too much information, you know.
Was he, question, was he aware of what you described earlier, the rebirth process, when you were making pictures, as you told the story about rebirth process when you put something into a creation? Like, was he ever aware of it? Or
yeah, because that's his quote. And when you meet him, he's kind of a buddy type. He's the guy you want to have a beer with, you know. But there was that side of poetry, you know. I think there's quotes here on the wall. There was the other side, and it was very there, you know. And you see it in his work. That's why I said right in the beginning, his work, his upbringing, you know, this child that's born in the war, that had to, you know, come to terms with him and his country and his, you know, and his upbringing, you know. And then he did this. And it's very, what Peter brought to fashion photography is feelings. Nobody's done that before, you know. People done style. What Helmut Newton, you all know Helmut, right? Helmut Newton made money sexy. That fashion loved that. Because if you look at pre-Helmut Newton in the 1950s, you know, money was the queen of England. It was people horse riding, you know, like, you know, having like long dresses. Cool, great, very comfortable, but they were not cool, you know, they were not sexy. And Helmut says, rich people can be sexy. They go to Saint-Tropez, they have a lot of women, they drive in crazy cars. He put two things together. There was, again, an antagonism, but that changed everything, you know. It was a break. It was kind of when Picasso started putting, you know, taking the third dimension out of a painting. And fashion is very hard. Fashion people, cool people are never rich, or very rarely, and rich people are never cool, you know, very rarely. And if you put these two together, you know, that's what Kate Moss is doing. Where's a picture of Kate somewhere around here? Kate is cool and rich. Very hard to find. But that's what she's selling to you. Giselle is not cool and rich. Giselle is rich, but not that cool, be honest, you know. She tries to play it cool, but she's not that cool, you know. And then there's other people, they're more cool, they're with the skateboard, but they're not that rich, you know. They're the skater boys in the city of New York. So fashion brings two things together. But what what Peter's done, Peter's contribution, and I think the reason why he belongs in this museum, the reason what he really brought in, he said, these are real people. They've been through something. They go through something right now. And when you look at them, you said, so did I. I feel you, you know. I feel your sorrow. There's a melancholy to his work, you know. It's not easy, you know. It wasn't always easy. And I think that's how he's connecting with people. And when you look at regular fashion pictures, they're perfect shots, you know? That's why I said extending the distance. There's beautiful, perfect fashion pictures, but you know it's not really you. Because you know you don't wake up like that. You don't go to sleep like that. You're not perfect like the girl on the L'Oreal advertising. But the girl is beautiful, and the hair is perfect, and the light is perfect, and everybody's rich, and everybody's happy. You know the pictures from Mario Testino? Great, you know. In Mario's world, rich people are beautiful. They're hanging out by the pool all day, you know. And you know, Peter, they worked at the same time. You know, I'm sure they were, maybe not friends, but there's a strong, Mario is what we expect. He's the obvious, you know. And Peter was like, no, you know. There's a vulnerability to this, you know. And if you look at all of this, the basic theme is, I tell you one thing really quick. Am I talking too much? I give you one thing really quick. There is a movie from Wim Wenders, Sky Over Berlin. And The Sky Over Berlin, the movie has been told from the perspective of two angels. And these two angels sort of like walking around, but they don't have a real access to the person besides empathy. If somebody does something, they can't stop him, but they can be guiding him. Now, when Wim Wenders shot that movie, he was talking to the DOP, and he says, I want the camera to be kind. And the guy's like, it's a camera. It's not a person. He said, the camera needs to be kind. In English, you would say a loving gaze. How do you say that in Estonian? How do you translate a loving gaze? Does it make sense? I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it. If I say it, you guys all are gonna laugh. A loving gaze, you know, and that's the definition. And that was hard for them. And they said, how can the perspective from the angel to the person needs to be a loving, caring view? That, he said, that is the movie. If I can't get that across, if the camera is cold, the audience is not involved. And I think what Peter brought, if you look at it, if you want to bring all the work from Peter to one point, it's kindness, you know. If you look at those eyes, there's always a sense of kindness. If you look at Helmut Newton's way, is cynicism, and it's a little grotesque, and there's a lot, but it's not kindness. He's not what he's looking for. And I don't think also Richard Avedon is not looking at kindness. He's looking at the human tragedy. You know, he's exaggerated. He said, you know, there's more pain, there's more suffering, there's more absurdity in Avedon's photographs. But Peter has a very soft, gentle approach, and it's kind. And I think that's what he was as a person. That's why intimacy is so important. That's why he said there is this space. He didn't put it in that word, but I really think he was good friends with Wim Wenders. And he did a few fashion stories, I don't think the pictures are here, from that movie. And that movie must have really like influenced him, because it's that what matters most is kindness. If you can express that in the person you're shooting, and nobody ever shot a supermodel, and the priority was shooting her as, you know, like I said, again, please Google that new Giselle picture and you understand what I mean. You know, it's not kindness, it's impressive, but it's cold.
So it's a revolutionary.
He changed, within something very little, he humanized fashion. And I tell you, it's not easy, because there's nobody around you that's interested in it. And the technological revolution that Peter was, you know, Peter's last pictures are shot in digital. You know that big portrait from Kate Moss, I think, in the beginning? It's interesting if you look at it, that's shot digital, you know. And I spoke to him about it. And he was less anti-technique as I am. He, you know, I don't shoot digital, but he said, it's the same, don't worry. But he said what he didn't like about the digital was the process, the screen, the immediate confrontation. You know, there was not the pregnancy. There was not like taking the picture, the accident that comes back to you when everything is over. You know, look, they're in LA, they're on the beach. Now you process the film, you go back to New York. When you see the film, this is over. Whatever comes back to you is what you have to live with, you know. Photography was a lot easier back then, you know. People had to accept facts. Today you can change, retouch, or alter the facts, including yourself. Very different world. You know.
So everybody who worked with him say that he was very kind, optimistic, and warm-hearted man. But version, or you just are both of the sides real Peter Lindbergh, or you just didn't show out this?
I think we all have, look, you can define all of our characters, everybody here in this room. There's four basic structures of a personality. It's sanguinic, melancholic, phlegmatic, and choleric. Now, I'll give you an example. I'm standing here and the cable is, whatever. No, I'll give you another example. It's stupid. I'm sitting in a cafe and I pour the coffee over my pants, right? There's four ways of reacting. One is you're like, what the fuck, my whole pants? Oh my God, look at this. What am I going to do? I'm such an idiot, look at that. That's sanguinic. Then there's the other guy who is choleric. He's like, what the fuck? I'm a fucking idiot. Fucking waiter, put that shit there, fucking bullshit, fucking pants. Oops. Oops. Wrong moment, it's not my mom. How do I turn this off? Okay, there we go. Okay, that was choleric. Then there is another version that would be phlegmatic. Somebody's like, oh, anybody got a towel? Or somebody has something to dry? It's kind of warm. That's phlegmatic. And the last version is melancholic. It's like, it's my life. Everything falls apart. Whatever I do, it's on the table, it's gone. Look, the coffee goes to the floor. There it goes, minutes of my life. And you will see that most of us have two of these. And that's the energy we all have. Now, you can be choleric and phlegmatic. You can be sanguinic and melancholic. But there is some contradiction. If you look at yourself or friends you have, you will see that they more or less have two of those. They combined in themselves. But there's also, if you're phlegmatic, if you're melancholic, and I think that was a little bit the question, there's also a lot of empathy in you because you said, my life is so miserable, but I know yours is too. So I'll feel for you. You know what I mean? If you, for example, if you do sports, you have to be a little bit choleric because you say, right here, punch me right there. Yeah, one more time, motherfucker, one more time. Sorry, it's not the right word. That's choleric. You said 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going up. You punch me right there. You have discipline because you're taking the pain because you're like, okay. And obviously, if you're phlegmatic, it gives you the patience sometimes to deal with things. Maybe to deal with a marriage, whatever there is, But, like I said, we all have a little bit of both. And I think to answer that question, I think Peter had a melancholic side, yeah. Obviously that's very much around. But I think he also, had a sanguinic side, But he was also very calm. And most people, I think, would agree that he was also a calm person, But, like I said, you will, if you know that, remember the first thing I said. If you know that, if you know two, you find out the third one through his pictures. Where does he grow up? What's his work? Who is he? You piece it together, and it always kind of works. Where does somebody grow up? What's his temperament? And then you do understand a little bit about his work. Questions?
Did you agree straight away to come and talk about Peter's work?
I don't know if I'm like the most, I've never done this. So no, it was not the easiest decision, But I'm very much, I'm very attached to his heritage. And he was around a significant figure in my life to a certain point. And at some point, you're there and you have lunch and you talk about photography and you're thinking, you know what? I used to be an assistant in New York. I had $5 and I used to buy your magazine and I looked at your pictures from Linda and now I'm buying you a dessert. That's strange, But that's not the end. The end is now I'm standing here talking about him and he's gone, and that's even stranger, But it's not that the way I see photography, Peter is a tradition of photography that is dying, through technical means. And one of the reasons why I would be here is because I would obviously like to keep it alive, But when Peter died, and when Franca Sciuzzani, the woman that made all this possible, let's be honest about this, all these pictures are commissioned. One thing that I would maybe have an argument about it with Peter is he never really did personal work. But he had a good point because he says, all my work is personal. I'm not separating. Avedon, Penn, even Newton. You see a lot of sometimes I'm surprised that you see very average fashion pictures from really great photographers, But they say, yeah, I get paid for it. I got to make a living. I got my rent to pay, But Peter never did that. Peter did not do personal work. Now, I would have loved to know, but he shot this on the set of Italian Vogue. What else can he do? But I do think you can challenge yourself to another level. However, when Franca Sciuzzani, who let him do personal work, because Anna Wintour didn't, and there is a reason that there is no picture of American Vogue in his exhibitions. There is no picture of American Vogue in Avedon's books, or in Helmut Newton, well, maybe in Helmut Newton, Because in the end, Helmut Anna let do in the end, because he didn't get stories, he got specific assignments, But you need somebody who lets you work, So when Franca disappeared, and Peter almost at the same time, and suddenly, photography is this, And something is going, something that is very meaningful to me, So I'm also here to remind you that there is more than just a phone. And like I said, that these people I don't, one thing that's also interesting if you look at, I don't want to make a statement against social media today, but especially from where we started, these are stories. The guy shot stories. And just out of the way the media right now is constructive with Instagram, you don't shoot stories, you shoot one shot, It's one picture, I'm having a conflict right now with Vanity Fair. I want to shoot Monica Bellucci's daughter. And I want to do story. And they're like, well, we need 3 pictures. I'm like, yeah, but, I want to do this thing about New York. They're like, why? Just put a light. We don't know if we have the budget for a studio. I was like, you don't have the budget for a studio? Like what generation are you from? Peter went with, they met at Pinup Studio in Paris, and if things didn't work out, they took 4 cars and they went to the beach at Deauville and shot it at sunset in Deauville with 50 people driving to Deauville with a bus, and you wonder what happened to this, So I feel a bit like a silent movie director, But yeah, like I said, there's a beautiful, there was something is gone since he's gone. And we didn't think, when I got the news that morning, I didn't think it would be that defining, But there's a good friend of Peter, Jim Rakete from Berlin, who said in a certain way, it's the end of black and white photography, of that type of that kind, Stop looking at your iPhone all the time, No more Instagram. Anyway, no, it's not true. But honestly, I would have loved to know how Peter would have reacted to this, to AI. What would I pay for having a conversation with him, about this? But it's true. Anything else I could do to make your day more pleasant?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Photographer, Vincent Peters. You as a photographer, do you share the Peter Lindbergh values about the retouchment?
About retouching?
Yeah, how you see this?
Um,
Because you photograph.
Yeah, I share his values on people, but it was for me it was a more confusing process, because when I came in, the computers were there, and I never went there like other people. There was something that was holding me back, but I still come from a time when it was very normal. I had to, look, let's say you're born in the 1950s, and I remember my dad took me to McDonald's and he says, oh, this is so cool, this is so American, you know, like everybody in America eats at McDonald's. And I was a little boy and I thought, oh, right, look, I'm an American, I'm John Wayne, I'm eating at McDonald's. It takes you a while to realize that this is not nourishing food, you know. It will take us a while to do what social media does to our behavior, to our focus, you know. It's, when somebody tells you in 20 years, were you on Instagram? And you're like, well, we were all on Instagram, what you going to do? But it's going to take you a while to process all the consequences to your nervous system, to your perception, to how your connection with life, you know? And I think it was the same thing for me with retouching. I was never really diving into it. And there was a time where there was a lot of pressure in the business. And again, Peter shot digital. And I can tell you a lot of stories, but I know you guys have to go, about his antagonism, again, with digital photography. But for him, it was the screen. He said photography is not democratic. But it's true, you've been as a photographer, you've been removed from the process, you know, if you shoot digitally, you know. And I think Peter says the photographer, that the position Helmut Newton had on the set. You know, look, when I shoot for Vogue, right? The editor comes to me and says, did you shoot the shoes? I'm like, sure I did. You know, she has to ask. You know, she put the shoes on, it's Dior, they have to pass the credit. No? There is a good word, incapacitated. How do you say this in Estonian? Incapacitate. Incapacitate is what they do when an older person makes decision they may be dangerous for themselves. They can be incapacitated, you know, like other people make decisions for him. That's what happens to photographers today. Other people, technicians think they have to make decisions for us because they think they know better than us. This phone is removing the photographer from the process. You've been, as a photographer, all the decisions. Look, there's photographers, there's still, you know, you can still change the aperture or the time or, you know, you can even, no, you don't have to do it, you know. The phone does everything for you, you know. So the technique is removing the photographer from the process, but he's also moving, as in Peter Lindbergh's case, the kindness, the kind point of view. What was the word, the loving gaze? He's removing the loving gaze, you know, because the machine doesn't have that. But the machine is perfect, you know. So I had to go through a process, and I realized, and I tell you, it's very hard because you make a lot more money if you take technically perfect pictures of Giselle. You've been well paid. And if you say, but this is not me, this is not who I want to be, and you're shifting to the side, you know, and suddenly your pockets are lighter, you know. And other people shoot more Vogue covers than you do because celebrities, they like to be retouched, they like to be, you know, they like to be perfect, you know, especially right now because they're getting older, you know. So it's a hard decision to make, you know, to say, I don't do that. You know, people say, oh, that's great, so you're kind of like an artist. But, you know, for Christian Dior, we like to have it a bit more slick, you know, and you're like, okay, so unfortunately, Dior is not for you, you know. And that was what happened to Peter. Peter got removed from Dior because he didn't want to shoot digital, you know. And then he eventually got it back, and, you know, but he had a big position already, you know. Does that answer your question? So retouching is, it's a drug, it's an animal. Once you're in it, you know, it's an evil drug that gets under your skin, and you have to fight it every day, you know. You have to let go, you know. And I think right now, I just, you know, I revisit older work. When I have an exhibition right now, I redo older work and remove all the retouching, you know, because I realize that this is what is between me and you is the retouching, and I don't want this. I want the barrier to be removed. And I think that's what Peter understood, you know. That's what I learned from him. But it took me a long time.
When do you think the next exhibition comes?
You know what? I'm very happy to invite you. I'm going to go to Rome, I think, in half an hour. And I have we're trying to have an exhibition in Rome, which is a beautiful city. And if you don't like my pictures, at least you get good food. But I'm trying to have an exhibition in Rome, which is, I think, a dream for an artist. And possibly there is going to be a little bit like at Photographiska, there's going to be me and Mario Testino exhibiting in the same space at the same time, which I think it would be an interesting...
When?
In May, June. In May, officially, it's supposed to start in mid-May. But you know, in Italy, Thursday is not Friday, so there's a lot. You know, but, I mean, you're happily invited to the opening if you want. You know, but I think Rome is it's a beautiful place. You know, in Rome, a museum is a palazzo. You know, and it's 300 years old, and there's something there. It's very like, you know, Caesar was walking through these halls. You know. Anyway, let's see. It's not easy to do that, to make it happen. I hope, trust me. Yeah. Any other question? Ask me anything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being patient. I hope I didn't go too far off the ball, you know. But I thought it would be good to give you a little bit more background about the time and the person and fashion.
Can you send your book?
Yes, of course. Yes. Yes. Thank you, thank you. But you know, you guys have all very difficult names, and you have to. I don't want to spell it wrong.